If you want to see the exact point where a friendship dies and a war begins, you have to go to the bridge at Malanville. For months, the government in Cotonou has been telling the world a very specific story. They say they have forgiven their neighbors. They say they have doused the fires of the blockade and opened the gates to the north. On the Benin side of the border, the barriers are up, the customs officers are waiting, and the politicians are smiling for the cameras. But when the trucks drive to the middle of that bridge, they stop. They don't stop because of a traffic jam. They stop because on the other side, the heavy concrete blocks of the Nigerian army haven't moved an inch. The world asks, why? Why would a landlocked nation, supposedly desperate for food and fuel, refuse to open its front door? The answer is simple, and it is chilling. It is because of the Benin secret bases. To understand the AES sovereignty, you have to understand that a border is not just a line for trade, it is a shield for survival. General Tiani and the leadership in Niamey have been very clear. They do not see Benin as a brother anymore. They see it as a Trojan horse. Niger has presented a devastating accusation to the international community. They claim that while Benin talks about brotherhood in public, in private, it has turned its northern territory into a staging ground for foreign aggression. They allege that the French military, kicked out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, has found a new, secret home in the forests of northern Benin. The accusation is not just about soldiers in uniform, it is about training centers for the very insurgent groups that have been tearing the Sahel apart for a decade. Niger argues that these bases are designed to destabilize the alliance of Sahel states from within. They believe that Benin is hosting the knife that Paris wants to stick in the back of the revolution. This is the great lie of the Cotonou government. They tried to starve the Sahel into submission by slamming the door shut in 2023. They acted as the enforcer for a regional bloc that had lost its way, believing that the landlocked servants would eventually crawl back and beg for air. But the AES sovereignty proved that dignity is a stronger motivator than hunger. Niger didn't crawl, they simply turned their heads and looked towards Togo. They built new lifelines, they found new friends. Now, Benin is the one suffering. Their port is quiet, their northern markets are rotting, their revenue has collapsed. In a desperate attempt to save their own economy, they have suddenly opened the border, expecting Niger to forget a year of betrayal with the flick of a switch. But you cannot burn a man's house down and then expect him to invite you to dinner because you finally put out the fire. Niger knows that an open border with an unreliable neighbor is a security nightmare. If those secret bases exist, an open bridge at Malanville is not a trade route, it is an invasion route. If you believe that a nation should never prioritize a foreign empire over its own neighbors, tap the like button, and let's pull back the curtain on the proxy trap. The standoff at the bridge is a symbol of the new reality in West Africa. The era of the coast is king is over. To understand why the AES sovereignty is so unyielding at the border, you have to look beyond the concrete barriers and into the thick forests of northern Benin. For nearly a year, the government of President Patrice Talon has dismissed Niger's accusations as paranoia. They claim there is no French boot on their soil. They tell the international press that they are merely victims of a misunderstanding. But in the world of intelligence, silence is rarely empty. It is usually a camouflage. Niger's military leadership has been incredibly specific. They haven't just made general claims. They have pointed their fingers directly at the Alibori region in northern Benin. They allege that in these remote areas, away from the prying eyes of the capital, the French military has established what they call ghost bases. According to the CNSP in Niamey, these are not just supply depots. They claim these sites are being used as training centers for mercenaries and armed groups whose sole mission is to penetrate the borders of the Sahel and spark a counter-revolution. Why is this so believable to the people of the Sahel? Because they have seen this movie before. For decades, the pattern of regime change in Africa has followed the same script: find a willing neighbor, build a quiet base, and filter weapons and advisors across the border. By acting as the primary enforcer of the ECOWAS sanctions in 2023, Benin didn't just hurt the economy of Niger, they declared their side in a broader war. They chose to be the anchor for French interests in a region that is desperately trying to sail away from them. But the French shadow isn't just in the northern forests, it is at the heart of the economy. Nigerian intelligence points to the very port that Benin is so desperate to reopen, Cotonou. They claim that even as Benin begs for the trucks to start rolling again, French military personnel and logistics experts remain stationed at the port, monitoring the flow of goods and personnel. For the leaders of the AES, this is an impossible situation. To open the border at Malanville would be like opening a vein. It would provide the perfect corridor for the very destabilization they have spent 3 years fighting against. The Benin secret bases are the reason the logistics pivot we discussed in previous videos is so permanent. When Niger and Burkina Faso look south, they no longer see a trade partner in Benin. They see a proxy. They see a nation that has traded its own AES sovereignty for a pat on the head from Paris. This is the proxy trap. Benin thought they could play the role of the colonial policeman, thinking that their geography made them indispensable. They thought that because they controlled the sea, they controlled the Sahel. They were wrong. By weaponizing their ports and their roads, they forced the Sahel to innovate. They forced the creation of the Togo corridor. And now that they realize the landlocked nations have found a way to survive without them, they are panicking. They are desperately trying to scrub away the secret base narrative so they can get their transit fees back. But the memory of the Sahel is long. The concrete blocks at the bridge are not there to stop rice or fuel. They are there to stop the French shadow. They are a physical declaration that the security of 70 million people is worth more than the profits of a port in Cotonou. The standoff is a test of will. Benin wants to return to business as usual, but the AES has realized that there is no business as usual when your neighbor is hiding a knife under the table. If you think the secret bases are the real reason the border is still closed, write phantom bases in the comments. And let's look at the Chinese factor. Because while Benin and Niger are staring each other down across the river, a third player is losing their patience. A player who has invested billions in the ground and who doesn't like it when their black gold is used as a bargaining chip in a regional feud. We need to talk about the Chinese dragon. While the world watches the soldiers at the Malanville Bridge, a much larger, silent player is losing its patience in the boardrooms of Beijing. To understand why the AES sovereignty is holding its ground, you have to understand the mathematics of the steel serpent, the nearly 2,000-kilometer crude oil pipeline stretching from the Agadem Rift Basin in Niger to the Siem terminal on the Benin coast. For the government of President Patrice Talon, this pipeline was supposed to be the ultimate insurance policy. It was a multi-billion-dollar investment, funded largely by the China National Petroleum Corporation. Under the original transit agreement, Benin was set to earn millions of dollars annually, just for letting the oil flow through its territory. It was supposed to be the golden ticket that diversified their economy away from a port that was already dying. But in mid-2024, as the diplomatic standoff with the alliance of Sahel states hardened, Benin made a fatal strategic error. They looked at the valve on their coast and they saw a weapon. They reasoned that Niger, desperate for cash to fund its new government and its military, would do anything to get that oil to market. They believed that if they threatened to block the exports, the military government in Niamey would be forced to open the border and normalize relations on Benin's terms. President Talon publicly linked the pipeline to the border, effectively saying, "If you do not open the bridge for our trucks, we will not open the tap for your oil." It was a classic chokehold strategy, but it relied on one massive miscalculation: the belief that Niger's need for money was greater than its pride or its security. Niger didn't blink. General Tiani and the CNSP did not send diplomats to beg. Instead, they doubled down on the narrative of the Benin secret bases. They argued that the safety of Niger's resources could not be guaranteed on the soil of a neighbor that was hosting foreign military trainers and mercenaries designed to destabilize the Sahel. Instead of capitulating, Niger ordered the flow to stop. They turned off the pumps. The multi-billion-dollar steel serpent went quiet. This move sent a shockwave through the global energy market, but the biggest tremor was felt in Beijing. The Chinese partners were furious. They had built the infrastructure, they had drilled the wells, and now their investment was being held hostage by a border dispute they wanted no part of. Pressure began to mount on Cotonou, not from Paris, but from the east. Beijing does not like it when its strategic assets are used as pawns in a local feud, but the damage to Benin's reputation was already done. In the high-stakes world of energy, reliability is everything. If a country is willing to turn off a pipeline to score political points, no investor will trust them with a long-term contract again. Benin had successfully blocked Niger's oil, but they had also blocked their own income. They were left with a hollow victory, a multi-billion-dollar dry tube, and a customer that was now looking for an exit strategy. Meanwhile, the AES nations have begun looking at alternatives. They have dusted off old plans to route their oil through Chad and Cameroon, or even through the Atlantic via new corridors that bypass the proxy states entirely. It would be expensive, and it would take years, but the message from the Sahel is clear. We will go the long way around if it means avoiding a traitor. This is the reality of the new AES sovereignty. It is a sovereignty that is willing to endure economic pain to ensure long-term security. They have realized that an open tap is worthless if the hand on the valve belongs to someone who wants to see you fail. If you want to see the leaked documents and the satellite data of the new energy corridors being planned to bypass the old colonial routes, consider joining as a member. We follow the resources, not the rhetoric. The Chinese factor has turned the standoff into a Gordian knot. Benin is now caught between a furious China and a defiant Niger. They thought they were the jailer holding the keys. They are slowly realizing they are the ones trapped in the room. But as the economic pressure on Benin reaches a breaking point, the situation on the ground at the border is becoming even more dangerous. We need to shift our focus to the ghost town of Malanville. While the politicians in Cotonou and the diplomats in Paris argue over valves and treaties, the physical border has become a graveyard of commerce. We must shift our focus from the high-level oil dispute to the visceral, ground-level catastrophe at the bridge. To understand the price of a lie, you have to travel to the border town of Malanville. Malanville was once the heartbeat of West African trade, a vibrant, chaotic marketplace where the currency changed hands faster than anywhere else in the region. Today, it is a parking lot of despair. The images coming out of this border town are haunting. They show thousands of heavy-duty trucks parked in lines that stretch to the horizon, motionless for months. If you walk through these parking lots on the Beninese side, the first thing that hits you is not the sight, but the smell. It is the sweet, sickly scent of decay. Thousands of tons of onions, tomatoes, and perishable goods harvested in the Sahel have turned into compost inside sweltering steel containers. These are the ghost trucks of the Malanville border. The drivers are not soldiers or politicians. They are ordinary men, many of them Beninese citizens who voted for the government that trapped them here. For over a year, they have lived under the axles of their trucks, cooking on small fires and watching their livelihoods evaporate in the heat. They are the human face of a failed blockade. This internal pressure eventually became a boiling pot. By late 2024, the anger in northern Benin was palpable. The people began to ask a dangerous question. Did France pay for my rotting onions? Did the regional bloc pay for my children's school fees? Under this immense pressure, the government of President Patrice Talon finally blinked. The hardline stance evaporated, and Cotonou announced that the sanctions were lifted. They opened their side of the gate, expecting the trucks to start rolling and the revenue to start flowing again. But when the trucks drove to the middle of the bridge, they saw the truth. The heavy concrete blocks on the Nigerian side did not move. the soldiers of the AES sovereignty stood with their arms crossed. Benin had opened the door, but Niger refused to walk through it. This is the moment the proxy trap snapped shut. The Nigerian leadership stated clearly that they could not trust a neighbor who had so easily turned into a jailer. They cited the intelligence reports of the Benin secret bases, alleging that foreign military installations were still active in the north, designed to destabilize the Sahelian revolution. For Niger, an open border is not just about trade, it is a massive security risk. If the reports of French-backed training centers are true, then an open bridge at Malanville is an invitation for sabotage. The image of Beninese guards waving trucks forward only to be met by Nigerian concrete is the defining image of this crisis. It represents a fundamental shift in the psychology of the region. For 80 years, the coastal nations believed they held all the power because they held the keys to the sea. But the alliance of Sahel states has proven that dignity and security are stronger motivators than hunger. By the time Cotonou tried to fix its mistake, the damage was already permanent. The traders had moved. The contracts were rewritten. The flow of goods had carved a new path through the mountains of Togo. Trust, once debased, cannot simply be printed again like a fiat currency. Where are you watching from? City and country. From Burkina Rising, may your loyalty always outweigh your leverage, and we build bridges for friends and walls for traitors. This leads us to the final realization. If the bridge is closed and the pipeline is dry, what is the ultimate fate of the proxy state? As Benin stares at its empty port and its rotting trucks, it is learning a brutal lesson about geography and sovereignty. The era of the coast as master is dead. The tragedy of the Benin-Niger standoff is that it was entirely avoidable. Geography dictates that Benin and Niger should be brothers, sharing a history, a culture, and a river. But politics, fueled by foreign directives, turned them into strangers. By acting as the enforcer for a regional bloc that had lost its legitimacy, Benin sacrificed its own national interest. They placed the demands of foreign powers above the economic reality of their own people, and now, as the dust settles, the magnitude of that error is undeniable. The Benin secret bases, whether they are fully acknowledged or hidden in the shadows of the Alabori forests, have become the ultimate wall. Benin wanted to teach Niger a lesson about geography. Instead, Niger taught Benin a lesson about AES sovereignty. The damage to the Beninese economy is not cyclical, it is structural. By the time Cotonou tried to fix the mistake, the traders had moved, the contracts were rewritten, and the flow of goods had carved a permanent new path through the mountains of Togo. History teaches us that trade routes are like rivers. Once they change course, it takes a massive effort to force them back into the old channel. Benin has lost its status as the default gateway and is now just a risky second choice. This crisis has exposed the total fragility of the old neo-colonial model. It showed that when a country acts as a proxy for external interests, prioritizing the demands of Paris over the needs of its own neighbors, the result is national suicide. The Beninese economy is the casualty of a war it did not need to fight. The lesson for the rest of West Africa is loud and clear. You cannot build your prosperity on the suffocation of your brothers. The era of the proxy state is ending, and the era of the partner state must begin. We are witnessing the redrawing of the map, a map where alliances are based on mutual respect, not historical obligation. The cranes in Cotonou may eventually move again, and the trucks may one day cross the bridge at Malanville, but the relationship will never be the same. The innocence is lost. The Sahel has learned that the only route it can truly rely on is the one it builds, defends, and controls itself. The door is closed, and the key has been thrown into the Niger River. If you stand for sovereignty at any cost and refuse to be a pawn in someone else's game, subscribe and share this warning with the world. We build bridges for friends and walls for traitors. That's Burkina Rising. The bridge at Malanville stands tonight as a monument to a simple truth. You can reopen a border with a signature, but you can only reopen a heart with truth. Until the shadows of foreign bases are cleared, the concrete stays. The revolution is not just in the capital, it is at the border, and the border is firm.